Okay, so now I'm going to just talk about some tips and strategies. If anyone is new, this can help you narrow down the answers for your cards questions, and then we'll start with going over the passage next. So what I like to do first is decide right away if you're going to do the passage. Sometimes passages that you know might be difficult, you might want to save them for the end. So that's what I like to do, just read a few sentences and make sure that passage is readable for you. And then I personally like to preview the questions so I know where to read the passage more carefully. But if this doesn't work for you, don't do it. Just make sure you do whatever works best for you because everyone reads differently. So cards is definitely more personal than the other sections. So make sure you find a strategy that works for you. And then after I read the questions, that helps me look in the passage where I should slow down. Uh, After I read the passage, you definitely want to do the easier questions first so you can build up your momentum and even understand the passage better. And then when you do get to other answers, you want to avoid extreme answers. Those are like anything that says anything too negative, too positive that the author didn't talk about in the passage. So that's understanding the tone of the passage and the author's perspective. So it's really comes better with practice, but you'll see how we do this in the couple passages that we'll go over. If anything's too broad or too narrow, if it wasn't discussed in the passage at all, those are answers you can usually eliminate. So you want to be careful about those. And consider the author's tone. If he was super positive and the answer is super negative, you can definitely cross that off. And sometimes there's a lot of details in the passage. You need to start practicing how to move on if you don't understand every sentence. And that's how we'll go over today that I like to make a summary word for each paragraph. So you can go back to it and kind of remember what the passage was talking about, even if you don't understand every single detail. Because with cards, it's really easy to get caught up in one sentence that might seem confusing. Does anyone have any questions on these strategies? Have they been helping you guys? I definitely want to know. So let me know about that. Okay, if there's no feedback, then we can keep on going. Okay, cool. So we'll go over this passage. How did you guys find this passage today? The fundamentalist, right? Easy? Okay, that's perfect. Great. Great. So I'll start off by going over the passage real quick and then make sure we understood that. So for the first paragraph, what did you guys highlight? Did you guys highlight anything in this? Feel free to write it in the chat or unmute. Okay, the church conceives their activities. They can justify them by the Bible. Getting saved is clearly only the first step. Okay, great. So how can we summarize this first paragraph? Anyone have like a summary for the first paragraph? Okay, yeah. Yeah, we can write how the church is trying to save them. So we want to keep it short. So I'm just going to write church and then saved. Um, we don't want to take too much time writing a full sentence for a summary. So what about the second paragraph? So in this paragraph, they were talking about the conduct of everyday life, what people can and cannot do. They have prohibitions against all these things. And they extended them to dressing, marriage, other things. And these rules are laid down for the members as well. Yeah, so how to raise your child, how to conduct yourself in marriage, things like that. So basically they're saying that the church has all these rules. So how can we summarize that up?
Strict rules for those that follow it.
Yeah, great. So we have some rules to follow. Okay, paragraph 3. Did anyone highlight anything here? Yeah, so family guidance. Yeah, the rules are laid out in this book called The Total Family. The wife should submit to the husband's leadership. And then being in charge is really important. Okay, anyone have a quick summary about this paragraph? Yeah, we can just also write family rules. Yeah, good job, guys. Thank you so much for participating and making this session interactive. Okay, paragraph 4. Okay, I kind of already highlighted some stuff, but the parent-child relationship is something they discussed in that book. He says that parents should have authority over their children, and they don't want another generation of irresponsible adults. So it's kind of up to the parents. Yep. Anyone have a summary for this? Yeah, so it's kind of explaining how that parent-kids relationships play out. Okay, last paragraph. So now we're defining relationships outside the family. So in the job, you should comply with the church and the government. You don't have the right to break the law. So, and then there's an organizational chart. So God is at the top, then the church, and then finally the family. Okay, yeah, so it's called God's chain of command. So does anyone have a last summary for paragraph 5? So I think we just talked
Societal
about
organization.
Yeah, great. Organization, perfect. Yeah, so here, just with these few summary words, you can talk about see how it progressed, how the church is kind of saving them, but there's strict rules, there's rules for your family, the parents have authority over kids, and then finally there's another organization for all of their relationships. So that's kind of what this passage was about. And then if you have more questions, you can go back to the paragraph and read the highlights. Okay, so starting with the questions then. Before I would have read the questions, so let's just pretend that I read the questions. So, what finding from other research would be most apt to raise questions about the conclusion reported in the passage? What did you guys think about this question? You can put your answer in the chat. Okay, yeah, so B, the Bible teaches that it's right to refuse in order to do wrong. Yeah, that would raise more questions because it did say in here that you should follow the Bible and stuff like that. So that would definitely raise questions about the conclusion in the passage. We didn't really talk about the other things, so D, this would probably strengthen the passage. C, this is kind of hard to tell. It wouldn't really weaken the passage because the pastor does have more authority based on the organization. So that wouldn't raise that many questions. And then A, we didn't really talk about non-Christian marriages. So that we can't really tell that. So that's why B would be the best answer. Okay. Moving on, number 2. Why should parents have total authority over their children? So we discussed this in paragraph 4. So if you didn't know, looking at the questions or the answers right away, what the answer would be, feel free to put the answer in the chat, but you would go back to paragraph 4 and then see that the parent-child relationship, you command absolute authority, and that's because you don't want to have another generation of irresponsible, undisciplined adults. So what answer choice would line up with that? Yeah, so C would be the best answer because the parents are responsible for who their kids become. Yep. Especially, yeah, correct. So especially by that last sentence that we highlighted. Yep. The other questions are not really discussed in the passage, or the answers are not really supported by that passage. Okay, if you guys have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. Okay, moving on to question 3. So a relationship between two people is best when yeah. So one person makes decisions for both people. Yeah, so we definitely talked about submitting and authority and leadership. So that's definitely an important aspect of just being in charge. Yep. Yeah, good job, guys. Question 4. What did you guys put for this answer? Yeah, so We talked most about obedience in the passage, so that's definitely something that um, would be along the lines of the passage. We didn't really talk about like being committed between other things to work versus family. We didn't really talk about the differences. We talked about similarities, but not differences, so that's not right. Working for oneself, we didn't really talk about selfishness as well. So definitely B would be the best answer here. Okay, and now we have kind of an inference question. So if you, based on the passage, we would go back to the organization and see where we would apply that concept. So what did you guys put for 5? Yeah, so total family, father first, then your mother, then children. So based on that logic, he would help his father. Okay, last question. So now we're not asked about the author, but we're asked about the writer, Edward Heinsohn? Okay. What did you guys put for question 6? Okay, yeah, let's go over this. Okay, in a marital relationship, would Edward be most likely to agree? So Edward was the person who wrote that book about the rules. So he said the wife is to submit, and then this places a responsibility of leadership to the husband. Yeah, so you have to take charge. That's basically what he's saying. So submission does not involve responsibility. We can't really say that because just because you're submitting, you're not completely not responsible for anything. So that's kind of hard to say. A wife has no authority over her children. We didn't really talk about that in the passage. Single people do not submit to anyone. We said, I think the passage most likely is saying everyone submits to, God at the top and then church. So we can't really assume this either. And proper leaders can command authority. So yeah, because if you're a leader and you're having people submit to you, you're having the authority. So that's what this passage is really saying, that you have the responsibility of the leadership, and then you have to submit. So the leader is the one who is commanding that authority. Does that make sense? That's why D would be the best answer, because if you're submitting to someone's authority, you're accepting their leadership as well. Do you guys have any questions on why it's not A versus D? Let me know, and then we'll move on. Okay, do you want to talk about why you said D versus A? Yeah. So yeah, definitely just be confident in your answer. this passage is really talking about authority, and we can't really assume that it does not involve responsibility. That's kind of a little too extreme to say submission does not involve responsibility. So I'd be wary if there's stuff like not or like never in that. So by saying a wife has no authority, so that's also kind of extreme, and we don't need to submit to anyone. That's also kind of extreme. And then here we have like can. So this is something you can like also try to pay more attention to wording, how they word things differently. The answer to one was, we can go back real quick. Yeah, B, correct. Okay. Great, so I will give you guys a passage now to work on, and I'll give you guys a few minutes to do that. Let me know once you have the passage, and we can go from there. Okay, let me know when you're ready to start, and I'll start the timer. Okay, great. I'll put the timer for around 9 minutes then. Let me know once you guys are done in the chat. Okay, great. You guys can still see my screen, right? Yep, okay, great. Okay, how did you find this passage? Was it easy, medium, a little difficult? Okay, cool. Let's go over it then. So first, I'm just gonna read the questions real quick. So what is the significance of the information that Athens was a direct democracy? Why is this not highlighting? Okay, sorry, give me a minute. Okay. Okay, so one would reasonably assume that democracy, and then we have the first paragraph. Oh, I see. I had it on remove highlight. Okay, cool. Which of the following beliefs would be most in agreement with the themes of the passage? And a probable reason for describing most slaves in Athens as prisoners of war. Which one would least expect to help improve the democracy? And according to the information, the attitude is like what? Great. Cool. So what did you guys highlight in the first paragraph? The last sentence, okay. The citizens governed themselves. Each polis had its own form of organization. And it started in the 5th century. And they were independent city-states. Okay, cool. So what can we say about this first paragraph? Does anyone have a quick summary word? Yeah, so kind of how the democracy started. I'll just write beginning of democracy. Okay. Paragraph 2. What else is important? Okay, yeah, so we have rule by the people. It was direct rule by every citizen, and it was not like representatives. There was an assembly. About once a week, every citizen has a say. Cool, so we're giving like an example of how it works. So how can we summarize that up? Any, yeah, so involvement, right back, cool. Paragraph 3. So who made up these citizens? And now we are considering social inequality and how it harmed their democracy. They were peasants, and there was no government like today. There was the council. It wasn't separate from social life. And then what was good for each citizen was good for the whole community. Yeah, so we're kind of given more of who the citizens are and why there was social inequality. So we can just write citizens in the democracy. Okay, paragraph 4. The citizen, now we're given more information about who the citizens are. They were just adult males who were born in Athens. So probably people outside of Athens that weren't born there probably did not have rights. Yeah, so resident aliens had certain rights but not citizenship. Okay, so 50% of the population didn't count. Okay, wow. Women were classified with slaves. Ooh, okay. And then money came to play as well. And then so by the 5th century, there was inequality in wealth and land. So now we kind of see more inequality. That's what 4 is. So the slaves and the women and other people that were not born in Athens. So there's a lot of inequality. Okay, last but not least, what did you guys talk about in or highlight in the last paragraph? Okay. Even the most developed democracy coexisted with money, inequality, and they did a lot of great harm. There was slavery. Slave society is misleading. So yeah, an Athenian slave should not be confused with a slave in Rome. Slaves were prisoners of war, many of whom worked in the households of wealthy Athenians. Okay, cool. Yeah, so definitely the prisoner of war. We're going to be asked about it later. Okay, last summary. What did you guys write here? Yeah, we talked a lot about slaves in this last one. Okay, cool. So now we kind of have a layout of the passage. So we talked about the beginning of democracy in Athens and how it was directly involved by each citizen. And we talked about the citizens in the democracy and how they lead. But then we got introduced to these inequalities in the democracy and the citizens, and we talked more about the slaves. Cool. So going back to the questions, question 6, what did you guys put here? So the attitude of Athens to its non-citizens. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, well, the relationship to Athens to its non-citizens, they have certain rights, but they're not citizens, and so their vote doesn't really count or mean anything. So they're kind of ignoring them. So which is what jaywalkers do to crosswalks. So that makes the most sense here. But let's talk about A, fathers to their stepsons. So we can't assume that every, stepson and father relationship is not going to be well, or like being neglecting or something like that. Because they can have a great relationship. So that's kind of out of scope. We're kind of assuming that. So we can't really assume that they would have a bad relationship. It's not like they're preying on them or treating them really badly. They're not attacking them or anything. They're just not involving them. So they're kind of ignoring them. So that kind of is what C is saying. Jaywalkers ignore the crosswalk, and Athens are ignoring the people that are not citizens in the democracy. And the author usually listens, so they're not listening to their non-citizens, so that's incorrect as well. Does that make sense to the folks that picked A? Yeah, I guess it would make more sense to explain why did you pick A? Do you want to explain your reasoning? Yeah, I'm kind of confused. Why are people picking A, fathers to their stepsons? Yeah, right, so yeah, so okay, the fairy tale usually depicts stepmother as mistreating. Okay, well, yeah, we can't really assume that because people have real relationships with their fathers and stepsons is not going to always be neglecting. So the attitude of Athens to his non-citizens was in paragraph 4. So resident aliens had certain rights but could not be citizens. So over 50% of the population just didn't count. So their vote or their opinion doesn't really matter. So that's why they're just being ignored, and that's why C is the best answer. But if you're saying fathers to their stepsons, I think that's really difficult because you could have a really great relationship with your father to your stepson. So it's kind of extreme to say that they're going to be ignored or not treated well. Does that make sense? Why A is kind of out of scope to assume that. Yeah, that's too much inference on your own if you're saying every like father stepson relationship is going to be bad. Right, you're bringing in outside knowledge. So anything like that we want to be careful about. Whereas jaywalking to crosswalks, you're definitely ignoring the law, just ignoring the crosswalk. And that's what Athens is doing with the citizens that are, non-citizens. You're not representing them in politics, right? Or in the democracy. Does that make sense? Let me know and then we can move on. Okay, cool. So what about number 5? Okay, yeah, this looks like which one would one least expect to help improve Athenian democracy? So we can cross up the ones that are going to help it the most, right? So if we had equal power, that would probably help them. If we allowed women to become citizens and participate, that would definitely help. If you abolish slavery, that would also help. So that just with process of elimination, D is the best answer. And if you allowed women to vote, but only as their husband's vote, that's kind of not democratic, and that's not going to help them a lot. Make sense? Okay, question 4. Why did we say slaves as prisoners of wars? And that was in the last paragraph where we highlighted it. So you could go back to this sentence right here. So we're saying that slave society is misleading, it's been exaggerated. We can't confuse Athenian slave with like a slave in Rome, and certainly not a slave in the United States. So they were just prisoners of war. So they're trying to seem like they're much better than they are. So that's why A would be a good answer here. We can't really say we were the war or the wealthy made it too warlike. That's not what the. Oh, can you guys not see the screen? Okay, you can see it. Okay, cool. Okay, so right here it says, in any case, an Athenian slave should not be confused with, for example, a slave in Rome, and certainly not a 19th century plantation slave in the United States. Yeah, so it is saying like a slave society is misleading. You can't really say that to Athens or ancient Greece, and they're saying it's been exaggerated. And you can't confuse it with other slaves around the world. So that's why A is the best answer, that they're trying to look like a better society than they are. Does that make sense? We didn't really discuss like the other type of societies. They mentioned just like different places. So it's not like a generalization. And then opinion that owning slaves is detrimental, but we can't really say that as well. That wasn't really what the author was trying to say. Going back to 5, yes, it was D. Okay, moving on. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, if not, what did you guys put for question 3? Yeah, so which of the following would be most in agreement with the themes of the passage? So we were talking about how to govern those people and how there's inequality. So we really wanted to look for that. So we didn't really discuss that the government is doomed. That's kind of definitely out of scope to say that. All governments should represent all those they govern. Yeah, that's also very extreme to say all governments should represent all everyone, you know. People care more about social issues than political ones. We didn't discuss that. So that's why A would be the best answer. Question 2. So given the information in the first passage, where we were talking about the beginning of democracy at the end of the 5th century in Athens, and Athens was an independent city-state that had its own form of organization where the citizens governed themselves. So that's kind of why. So what did you guys put for that? Yeah, so it improves the city-state because Athens was a city-state. So that's why that would be a best answer there. We can't say that democracy was only created in Athens first. It just suggests that it started, the Western people thought so. And it's not saying it's popular in the West. That's not addressed there. And then paragraph 1 also didn't say that. So we want to stick to the information in just paragraph 1. Does that make sense? Okay, moving on to question 1. Oh, okay. We have a question for question 2, C and D. One would most reasonably assume that democracy improves the city-state versus serves its people well. So here we didn't really talk about how democracy was helping people. We just talked about Athens and how it was an independent state and how it was doing well. So we didn't really say anything here if the democracy was going well or not. So I think by just sticking to the information in the first paragraph, we can just say only something about Athens right here. Does that make sense or no? A little bit? Okay. How about I come back to it in a bit at the end, and then we'll go over it a little more. I don't want to run out of time, so if anyone has to go, I don't. But we'll come back to it in just a second, okay? So what did you guys get for number 1? So Athens was a direct democracy. Yeah, so Athens was a direct democracy. What does that mean? So I think we mentioned that, where was it? I'm pretty sure it was here where we talked about the democracy and citizens governing themselves. And then we have a direct involvement, an assembly, which had all the citizens would meet and speak about everything they want. So that's kind of saying how it was direct rule by every citizen, how every citizen is going to be able to speak and talk about their issues in society. So that's why B is kind of the better answer here, because you're reflecting all of the issues that are present in the society if every citizen is able to talk and is directly ruled by the people. So that's kind of what is B is saying. So C is saying it emphasizes the importance of the concept of the citizen to democracies. So yeah, we did talk about that, but that's not why it's a direct democracy. That's not answering the question of what's the significance of being a direct democracy. So it's not because it's important to have citizens to democracy. It's important because you want every issue to be reflected in the society. That's what B is saying. C is not saying that. It's not just because we want a concept. Yeah, so it can be correct. Yeah, but you're not answering the question. That's correct. Yeah. So you want to answer the question. Okay, cool. I'll go back to number 2 again. So given the information in first paragraph, one would most reasonably assume that democracy does what? Okay, so in the first paragraph, that was the beginning. So democracy was shaped in Athens by independent city-states. and each polis had its own form of organization, and the citizens democratically governed themselves. So all we're talking about here is how democracy in Athens is able to help only Athens as independent city-states, and how they had their own government like that. So we're not saying anything about the people here though. So that's why we can't say anything about D, because we can't assume that. Does that make sense to whoever had the question about number 2?
Yeah, I guess I was just confused by the word improves because I thought that would suggest like we need some sort of comparison, and like we didn't really have any other city state to compare it with to say that the democracy itself would improve it. And then I was basing the serves its people well on the like that last bit where it says the citizens democratically govern themselves.
Okay, yeah. So it's just saying like communal life in Greek settlements were independent city states, and then that's why like kind of Athens was like transitioning. Um, and 5th century Athens were the most advanced. So here, the citizens democratically govern themselves. So that's why I'm saying Athens was the most advanced. It is because it had that democracy, and that's why it was able to improve their city-states. So that's what it's saying in Greece, that there were independent city-states and Athens was the most advanced one. Okay, great. If there's no other questions, thank you guys for coming. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming today, and look out for the email if you can fill out the survey, just letting us know what we can do better. And if you're able to make a donation every month, that would really help us out. So thank you guys so much for coming, and do let us know how we can do better to help you guys out.